Good afternoon, everybody. How are we?
Hello, Victoria.
Hi. I know so many people in this room, which is so gorgeous, and also new faces, so welcome. I'm Victoria Robinson, Director of the American Culture Center and faculty in the Department of Ethnic Studies. And I just want to share that this initiative, Teaching in Troubled Times, is a co-led initiative between the Division of Equity and Inclusion, Center for Teaching and Learning in the Academic Innovation Studio, and the AC Center. Like all good things on campus, no one person does them. We don't have the capacity to do them on our own. So Jean Cheng and I are here today representing two of those spaces.
There's space left here for Amy Sharp, who's a key partner.
Yes, she'd be down here, about there. Which is always the case with us too. And you know what, just one thing, because it always kind of confuses me, that's not right, that clock. So don't use it to guide your time. It really is like,
somebody should really fix it.
Somebody should really fix it. I could manage it. So quick background to the Teaching in Troubled Times series, if this is your first time being here. So this began over two and a half years ago, and it was really coming out of a request from the American Cultures faculty. And if you don't know what the American Cultures curriculum is, it's a curriculum now that's been offered since '91 on campus. It's the single campus graduation requirement, and it is built and circulates through an analysis of race and its intersections. Every student has to take at least one of these courses. So this is a curriculum that's been around for a long time. It's taught in 49 programs and departments across campus. It keeps growing. And AC faculty in those early months of 2016 were feeling very stressed, very anxious about what was going on in the world, both here in the US and around the world, and thinking about how did they know how those things were going to show up in their classroom. Everything from climate change to economic pressures to political turmoil. They felt and knew that their students would bring their bigger lives into the classroom, and they were wanting support. So we started this series. It opened up as a very casual, big dialogue about what were people thinking about, that they wanted some advice on in the classroom. And then it developed as a series of very specific topics. So I think Jean's you can pull up. On the American Cultures website, if you went to Teaching in Troubled Times, you'll see that there's about 12 events that we've been through in that period of time. Everything from economic pressures in the classroom. What is it that we know about the economic status and experience of students, faculty and staff that comes into the classroom? How might we think about that, both theoretically and be informed by some of the pressing literature, the growing body of literature, and also the nuts and bolts about the experiences of the faculty in the classroom. And unfortunately, most of these topics keep coming back in terms of their relevance, what to do if ICE comes to campus, right recommendations and resources. As we know, policy moves and shifts very fast, so we're trying to keep each of these workshop information sheets up to date. So if you went into, say, Squeezed on All Sides here, do you just point and click on that one? Here, what we've been trying to do is capture both the event itself, and then if we scroll down, we have some FAQs and big learning pieces that came out. We had, keep going down, Jean. We have resources for students that came out that were both recommendations from that moment and also things that have been built out. Then we have resources for faculty, how to think about affordability, textbooks, etc., how to support and create a scaffold for your students in those spaces. So each one of those workshops, including the one you're in today, is really trying to create a fabric, a scaffold for the broader campus, not just the AC community. Do you want to share?
Well, the one thing I would add is that you can see that there's a lot of work here and that it's framed around panelists. And we always intended this to be a facilitated dialogue, not like an expert-led panel discussion. But there are a lot of amazing resources that were sort of coming out of this program. And one of the reasons we've decided to frame this semester as a semester of learning is to kind of make it a little bit more participatory, like build in time and opportunities for the people who come to these to bring their ideas to the table, and then also help ask you to help us capture kind of the important takeaways and develop resources that can then be shared back to the campus. So this is, Victoria valiantly put all this effort together to kind of retroactively build these resources out. But I think going forward, we are trying to, partner with all of you to do that, but also create a sense of a learning community where you kind of know that this is a space and this is a place where you can bring questions that you have or topics that you want to talk about.
Yeah. So again, as Jean said, this is a semester of learning. So we planned out a series of events. We just want to flag the ones that are going to come up.
Oops. So these are the ones for this.
So this is our kickoff, and as Jean said, we really want it to be a dialogue, a conversation. I've learned from my students that you can't just expect community, you have to build community. So this is very much about putting in the time and the effort for us to feel engaged with each other and to kind of boil to the surface some of the pressing questions that we have. And then the next event is very quick on the heels. It's next week on Thursday, Difficult Knowledge, Trauma-Informed Pedagogy and Safe-ish Spaces. So we know that there's a lot of language around inclusivity in the inclusive classroom that we might both be familiar with but also have issue with. And safe space is one of them. How do we as faculty and staff and our students think about anxiety? What is stress in the classroom? How do we trigger or think about triggering students? How do we think about where safety is and for whom in the classrooms? So we've been really fortunate that the people leading this are Zeus Leonardo from the School of Education, an incredible scholar, and Anita Bautista. We got her almost as soon as she got to campus. She's brand new and she does incredible work. And Elisa Huerta, the director of the Multicultural Community Center, whose experience and body of work is just so rich. So we hope you'll join us for that.
I'm just going to close.
And then the next one is called Beyond Accommodations, Changing the Disability Frame. Do you quickly want to share?
So similarly, I think there's been a lot of conversation on campus about the rise in the number of accommodations that are coming up for disabled students program and how to address those and put resources behind that. But then there's also a lot of scholarship around disability studies and how do we think beyond just the idea of like this kind of burden or something that's imposed upon you to maybe a more strengths-based view of disability and a more inclusive view of disability. And there's lots of different ways of approaching that. We asked some faculty who research this as well as staff who support these kinds of issues to come and have a conversation. And the one thing I would say that is kind of a theme through our series is this combination of like a more expansive view of the topic and stretching and maybe challenging ourselves a little bit about how we think about these topics, but also combined with really practical on-the-ground strategic approaches that you can use so that it's not just this thing that's too big to think about. So that's kind of true of all of these.
Yeah. We're Berkeley after all. We want to figure out what the best of the field is saying, and our faculty have a conversation.
Can I say one last thing about this? So Amy's leading this one, but you can see there's quite a few panelists, and this list keeps growing longer, and there's more people who want to be on this panel. So this may get reconceived, but it tells you the amount of expertise on this campus around this topic.
Yes.
Okay.
And we may have one more event. The hope between us is that there'll be one more event between the November and December event. But we really want to use this culminating event to do what Jean introduced already, which is to bring the community together, to think about the resources, the tools, the learning that's happened in the room, and to create in some ways a homegrown Berkeley initiative of populating the meaning of the inclusive classroom. And what does that shape for us? What does that look like for us? What does it include? What would be some of those tools and practices that we as a campus would want to share? And we're very excited about that, and this is a series that is co-sponsored by Kathy Koshland in VCUE and Oscar Dubon in VCE&I, and they are very excited that we're the ones who are naming and doing the work, this room, this collective, and there will be some recognition at the end of participating in this series. But I don't want to give it all away or also put the cart before the horse, because what that recognition might look like could also depend upon the expectations of this room.
Yeah, and one thing I would just call out is that this, what that turns into could also include scholarship and maybe collaborations among different faculty to kind of study the learning that's happening in their classes, and so it can lead in a lot of different directions. And I think part of it is identifying gaps in terms of what exists in the literature as well as what exists in terms of knowledge and practices. So it's great that actually Kathy and Oscar want to kind of put their stamp behind it and put some, and we're hoping that this is just the beginning in terms of getting recognition and then maybe sort of sustained support. They don't know that, but that's, that's always the goal.
We're managing up. So with
yeah,
that
we hope
said,
you'll come. And actually, so we did put sign-in sheets for on each table. So if you could be sure to put your name and your department, and if you're interested in the full series, let us know, because then we'll sort of make an extra effort to reach out to you. Let's see. Okay. So next up, I think,
is Andrew.
Yeah, is Andrew. So we're gonna switch over. Any questions so far,
Yeah.
or for those of you who came in? It's great that there's this turnout. We do want to make sure that so the way this is going to go is we're going to turn it over to Andrew now to sort of talk about some campus climate data. But we've structured these tables so that you can then kind of talk at your tables about things that your own experience and kind of what you've heard. And then we're going to come back as a group and talk about that as a whole group. And we're hoping that each table will also have a note taker so that we can capture some of the thoughts and ideas that are happening in the group discussion. So feel free to sit over there, but at some point we're hoping you can join the group.
Just note, we are recording, but actually we're recording Andrew, because he's brilliant. You're all brilliant too, but we know that we want to catch Andrew.
Okay, so
No pressure. No pressure to be brilliant, Andrew.
all right, so, and there's food back there, people didn't see.
Hello.
Hi.
And I want to thank Victoria and Jean for inviting me to be here today. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy days to come here. Can everybody hear me? If you can hear me, try and give me a signal. How about now? Oh. Much better. And if there's ever I go back into my lower register, please feel free to say louder. So again, thank you. And just to ground us here, there was a little bit of confusion, and I hope that you are not expecting to see results from the My Experience survey, which are forthcoming this fall. But we will be talking about other climate survey information. So I just wanted to disappoint you right away in case that was coming. But today we'll be talking about looking at UC Berkeley students and their experiences focused on undergraduate students. Obviously there are graduate students, but the data I'm showing today is on undergraduates. So again, my name is Andrew Eppig. I am from the Division of Equity and Inclusion. I'm the Institutional Research Analyst there, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. Just to give you a sense of where we're going today, I'm going to talk a little bit broader about California very briefly, and then dig into our student demographics, looking at race, gender, sexuality, class, disability, a little bit on some intersections between those, and then digging into some survey results, looking at basic needs, campus climate, and sexual violence and sexual harassment. Yes?
I forgot to clarify. Do you want people to ask questions as you move through, or wait till the end?
And please feel free to ask some questions during on. If it's a little more detailed, I may delay my response until the end, but please feel free to ask questions, clarify things, and I'm always happy to stick around afterwards if you have additional questions. I'll have my contact information at the end of this, so please feel free to reach out, follow up, contest things, ask questions, push me further. All of it is deeply welcome. So let's start with California demographics. And I do want to say that sometimes I'm going to be throwing a lot of data at you. It might be a little hard to read, and for which I apologize. But I'm going to try and just highlight a few things and not expect you to sort of read everything on the screen. And I'll try and help you guide through what we're looking at here. So this is California. This is from the 2017 American Community Survey, which is put out by the US Census. And one thing to note is that I'm using a slightly different methodology than both what we use here on campus and what the normal federal government definitions are, which is that I'm including people in, regardless of how many different categories they've checked. That's not something that Berkeley or the US government or the state of California normally do. You have to dig into some tables to find that. The information is available. I'm going to be using a few different methodologies, and I'll try and explain which one I'm using. But I do apologize for that. This is all, race is a construct, and there's lots of different ways to construct it. So I hope you'll bear with me. So, we have, in 2017, we had just under 40 million people in California. Of them, just over 2% identified as Native American or Alaskan Native. I want to start off there because we are on occupied land here. This is Waitranaulone land and has been since 1868 when the university started colonizing. So I wanted to start there and then just think about, one thing as I go through this is thinking about what does it mean, how do these numbers sit in context to history, current reality, and then how that thinks about students in your classrooms and their experiences, what they're bringing, what they're experiencing on campus. Followed, we have 40%, so the plurality of California is Chicanx, Latinx, just under 40%. By far the majority of that is Mexican or Chicanx. I'm not going to show every single group because I would be here all day, but I just wanted to hit a few highlights. One thing is that following that is Central Americans. We have just under 4% of Californians trace their ancestry to Central America, followed by South American, Puerto Rican, and Cuban. We look at then African American is 7% of the state. Pacific Islander, just under 1%. For Asian, it's a little over 15%, so 17%. Predominantly or mostly Chinese, but not Taiwanese, followed by Korean, Asian, Indian, Filipinos. We have East Asians. I'm trying to disaggregate the Asian category, which is not often done, but I'm not going to go through all of it. But I do want to mention that there are a few groups that are bigger than we might expect. So for instance, we have California is 0.3% Hmong, which is actually higher than the percentage of Taiwanese in California. It's higher than the number of Pakistani, Thai, and Indonesian. So it's a small group, but they're actually one of the larger ones compared to groups that we might think about prior to that. And then over here, we have white. I've done something, this is the white alone per the US Census, so 37%. And one thing to note is that per federal methodology, they've actually erased Southwest Asians and North Africans under white. So I've disaggregated some of them. California is just under 1% Arab, 1% Armenian, and 0.5% Iranian. There are many more. I just want to list the few largest ones there. So just thinking about, this is sort of the landscape of race ethnicity in California. It could be much, much more, but just sort of sitting with some of that. And what does that mean for where our students are coming from? And what also, as a public institution, who should our students look like? And one thing is, do they look like this? So bringing in, moving on to Berkeley, this is from last fall. This current term, we don't have the official numbers yet. Those will come out in a few weeks. But this is from a year ago. This is all undergraduates looking again at race ethnicity in this multiplicative sense of counting people in more than one category. One thing you'll note is that we have just under 31,000 undergraduate students, and a slight majority of them are Asian. One thing to note is that includes both international and domestic. We have about 15 or so % international students. Most of them are from East Asia.
Andrew?
Yes.
Doesn't it make it difficult for us to compare mentally with the previous slide? Because the previous slide was California residents from the ACS and does not include international students. So why didn't you just subtract out the international students for these If
So,
you want, I mean, if you presented the California first, it's because you want us to think about this relative to the state.
mhm.
So shouldn't this set of people be just the domestic, or at least the California resident students?
That's a good question. One thing is that even though the census also includes international, it's not just domestic. It's not just U.S. citizens. But you are right.
No, but
that-
it's residents.
Yes, it is. It
International
is.
students are not residents.
Yes, that's a very good point. So I have done that in some senses, but
And then my other question is, you have all in transfer, but you didn't pull out first year, so you want us to do the math to create the 4-year students?
I'm just highlighting a few groups.
But
Yeah,
but the 4-year students are all minus transfer, right?
almost yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So what I'm doing here, this is everybody. These are transfer students, so students who come in from community college. Almost all of them are coming from California community colleges. Students who are receiving Pell Grants, and then women. And the blue is what are disproportionately in a certain group. So when we see, white among transfers, 34% compared to everybody is 32%. So transfer students are disproportionately white compared to overall undergraduate students. But when we look at everybody, one thing to note is that about 20%, 1 in 5 of our undergraduates are transfer students. They're not coming directly out of high school. Many of them are older. We have a decent number of students who are coming in over 25, age of 25. 53% of our students are women. One thing to note, this is using our still official Berkeley UC binary gender category. I'm going to try and move away from that and look at the survey data, but that's where that is right now. 26% of our undergraduates are Pell recipients, kind of a proxy for low income, although note that Pell can go up to $60,000, $80,000 a year, so it doesn't mean low income. Low income per federal definition is 200% of the poverty level, which in California is around $50,000 a year. 26% of our undergraduates are first generation college, and 75% of them are California residents. One thing to note is that a lot of these are disproportionately transfer students. As I mentioned, transfer students are actually disproportionately white because we have far fewer Asian students among our transfer students. But when we look at our traditional underrepresented minority categories of African American, Chicanx, Latinx, and Native American Alaska Native, they're disproportionately represented among transfer students. Also, we see Pacific Islanders and Southwest Asian North Africans also disproportionately among transfer students. When we look at Pell students, we also see, again, they are disproportionately our minoritized students, disproportionately women, disproportionately first generation college. Almost all of our Pell students are California residents, 96%. And when we look at women, we actually see that women are, again, disproportionately Pell, disproportionately first generation college, disproportionately California resident. And one thing that's notable is that they are disproportionately in that URM umbrella. And again, one thing to know, I'm combining domestic and international students. When you remove them out, we actually see that we actually see parity for women and men only among white students. Every other group we see women outnumbering men. So thinking about sort of problematizing that we see often hear about where are the men, the missing men in higher education. At Berkeley and many other places, they're disproportionately men of color, particularly URM men. So what does that mean in terms of what the dynamics on the campus and what that signals to the broader communities there are? So now, even though you pointed out this is not an exact relationship, although it will be, for these particular groups, far more accurate because for Berkeley, most of our international students are going to be Chinese, Korean, and Asian Indian. So these are much more apples to apples, but you are correct that when you look at true California residents versus California residents, that's the true apples to apples, although these trends still come here. So this is who is underrepresented in the sense of California versus Berkeley. So this is basically combining the two slides that you've seen, but digging into a little more detail. So the light blue is California, and the dark blue is UC Berkeley. And this is sort of in descending order. We have California is 0.3% Hmong. Berkeley is 0.1%. So there's only 1/3 as many Hmong students on campus as there are in California. Native Americans are 2.1% in California, 0.8% of our student body. It's been pointed out, I'm not the one who said this first, but given that we have, until recent years, 10,000 remains of Native Americans in our storage facilities, that there are more dead Native Americans on campus than living. And what does that mean for our students to have more of their deceased ancestors potentially on campus than in their classrooms, teaching them in their classrooms? Yes?
Are these underrepresented numbers consistent at UCLA and San Diego as well?
That's a good question. Are they, I don't know specifically. I know that UCLA has much higher African American numbers than we do. They're closer to 4 or 5%. I think.
Do we know why?
Do we know why? We have guesses, or I have some hypotheses. It's an active question. Why is UCLA doing better than we are, given how we're both top end, in certain rankings? They've beaten us in recent years in terms of being the top public university in the world. So they're extremely competitive. They're top notch. They're in California. Why are they better at having demographics than we are? It's a question we need to ask ourselves seriously, because there's really no excuse. We can't say, oh, it's about competitiveness or anything like that, when UCLA is just as competitive and doing better. So short answer, no, I don't know why they're doing better than we are. Again, I have some guesses, but I don't know. It's an active area of inquiry for me. Chicanx Latinx are 39% of the campus. Of California, 16% of the campus. We think about our goal to become a Hispanic serving institution, which is 25%. Even if we reach that, we're still, 2/3, 3/4 of the way there. We have a lot more to go to be in terms of fully representative in terms of the campus. Again, African Americans, we're about half, 7%, versus 3.6%. One thing to note is that these are actually, the numbers get even worse when you look at college age individuals among students who are in that 18 to 25, because they tend to be more people of color in that, tend to be younger in the US and in California. So really, when you look at that 7%, it becomes more like an 8% when you look at younger, more college age students. Laotian are 0.2% of California, 0.1% of Berkeley, so only half as many. For Pacific Islanders, 0.8% of the state, 0.6% of the campus. And this just changed recently. We used to have about parity, we used to have slightly more Filipino students than in California. It's now looking like we have fewer than that. So there's a slight underrepresentation for Filipinos on campus. One thing that I think is very relevant, especially we are under Prop 209, which forbids affirmative action. And thinking about UC in its context from UC Regents versus Bakke, which was a seminal Supreme Court case around affirmative action. Justice Thurgood Marshall had a dissent. He said, it's because of the legacy of unequal treatment that we must permit the institutions of the society to give consideration to race in making decisions about who will hold positions of influence, affluence, and prestige in America. And Bakke is what undid that. Bakke said the only valid use of race in admissions is for diversity. This sort of vague notion of diversity of different, people from different backgrounds bring different things, as opposed to what Justice Marshall was talking about, which is an actual act to address a historic and current wrong. And so we've shifted away from that since Bakke was decided, and even further by banning Prop 209. So this is the reality that we face currently. Now I'm going to move into survey demographics, moving outside of race, moving into other things. So this is from the 2018 Undergraduate Experience Survey. This is the percentage of respondents who identified in different demographic groups. So we have women are 56% of respondents. One thing you'll notice that's slightly higher than our campus, which is 53%. Part of that is women respond to surveys at higher rates. So there's a little bit of disproportionality. Most other things are mostly proportional, but that I'm going to be showing you unweighted survey results. So keep that in mind of some of the weighting that's happening. Just under 4% of respondents identified as transgender or gender nonconforming, with the majority of those as gender queer or gender nonconforming. So thinking about in classrooms, how much are you perpetuating notions of a gender binary? What are you doing around pronouns? And also, it's just a small percentage of our students are intersex and non-binary, which is slightly different from gender identity, but related. Just under 20% of students identified as LGBTQ+. The T, I think the T is under gender identity. I'm talking about sexual orientation. Predominantly, 7% of our undergrads identified as bisexual. This is far higher than in recent years. This is congruent with recent trends where we see much higher numbers of young folks identifying as bisexual or in a broader part of the LGBTQ communities. One thing to note, it's not here, but our LGBTQ+ students are disproportionately students, URM students, they're disproportionately low-income students, they're disproportionately first-generation college students. They're not just, sort of that stereotype of the affluent white gay man. They are not. They are more likely to, they're disproportionately, again, coming from these low-income, divested communities facing multiple marginalizations within that, not just across for their sexual orientation or their gender identity. Speaking of class, about 1 in 3 of our students identified as the growing up low-income, poor, or working class. And about 1/3 self-reported that their household income was under $50,000. One thing to also note is that over 1/3 of our students identified as having 1 or more disabilities, predominantly emotional or mental health, but following that is neurodevelopmental or cognitive, physical disability or learning disabilities, and then others. One thing to note is that only about 1/3 of those students are receiving services. So you're going to have a decent number of students who have a disability but aren't necessarily receiving treatment or accommodations or services related to it. Any questions on this? Yes?
Do you remember what the question was, how it was worded in terms of disability or condition?
Mm-hmm. That was sort of there were sort of these areas, these 5 areas. It was a sort of binary yes, no. Do you have, and there were some examples that I've removed for brevity, but they were just saying, do you have any of the following? It wasn't as extensive as other ones, but
I guess I was wondering, because I know we've seen coverage of like the rise of anxiety and depression in the student population, so I'm wondering if that's reflected in that first.
Yeah, so depression was explicitly part of the mental health part. There certainly can be a debate around which of these is it. What does disability mean? Obviously, there's going to be a whole series on that. But yeah, and feel free to ask clarifying questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. Wanted to dig more into some things around race and class. I'm going to be disaggregating race ethnicity here. This is now not from the survey. This is from actually 2016. But I haven't updated it since then, but it's pretty similar. This column here is looking at first generation The next one is looking at Pell recipient status. This is looking at low API. So the California Department of Education used to rank high schools based basically on sort of test scores and other measures to form an academic performance index. And this is, did a student graduate from a school in the bottom half of that ranking? So it's a public school in California. So I think of these three measures, first generation, low income, and coming from a under-resourced school or a more divested community, as sort of three dimensions of class. And I can combine those into saying, is this, how many students are all three of them, two of them, one of them, or none of them? And we can see that overall, that top row of the campus, 54%. So over half of our students are not first gen, not low income, and didn't come from a low API school. However, the colors are there to guide you. Blue is above more than the campus. Orange is lower than the campus. So we see for white students are less likely to be first generation college. 18% of them are first generation college. They're more likely to have none of them. 63% are not low income, not first gen, not low API. When we look at a group like Chicanx Latinx students, we see that 70% of them are first gen, 64% of them are Pell recipients, and a third of them are low API. And in fact, a quarter of them are all three. So that intersection of all three dimensions. I'm going to quickly go through some things, but I want you to show more disaggregations here. But I want you to think, what do you think is the group with the highest percentage in all three? So in this chart, it's Chicanx Latinx students, but that's a broad category. So just hold in your mind who you think, which group has the highest percentage of all three. This is for our URM communities. We see that within our Chicanx Latinx students, it's predominantly our Chicanx or our Mexican American students, who are just under a third of them have all three of those. One thing to note is that even though these are higher, these may not be representative of the state. For instance, about 90% of Chicanx Latinx folks in California over the age of 25 don't have a college degree. So that's, if we were to be representative, that number might be more like 90%. So even if we have higher representation, that still might not be matching the broader community. When we look at Asian Pacific Islanders, we see East Asians have a lot less experiences with first gen, low income, low API in terms of Berkeley students. Again, there's a question of how does that compare to the larger community? When we look at the Chinese community in California, only 50% of them over the age of 25 have a college degree. But we see only 28% of our campus as first gen. So there might be a potential mismatch there in how we're doing. But when we look at where are some high blues in this column, right down here we see Hmong students. 63% have are first gen, low income, and low API. Yes?
And these are combining the international and domestic students, right?
Yes.
Did you do this, splitting that out? Because I would think that you would get, your blues would be predominantly the international students who are paying full fare.
Yeah, so the international is this column here.
Yeah.
And so you can see that some communities, for instance, over half of our Indonesian students.
I'm sorry, which column is international?
This one right here.
Oh, I thought that was intersection.
That's totally fair. I didn't disclose what that was. So, yeah, so these do change a little bit when we look at remove the internationals.
I guess I don't understand. In the South Asian row,
Mm-hmm.
you have 77% of the South Asian, of the 2,162 South Asian students are zero, have none of those three categories, right? But what's the 14%? 14% of the international South Asian students have none of those three categories? Or
No,
14%? I don't know.
14% of South Asians are international students. So we see 2% of them have all three, 77% have none of them. However, 14% of them probably can't be some of them. Like you can't be an international student and get a Pell. So you're excluded from that. So this is rough. You're absolutely right that to dig into this, true apples to apples would be California residents, U.S. citizens, to be able to look at that.
But you need the citizenship part, the residency.
Well, the citizenship would, so that you could get Pell. We look at Pacific Islanders, we see a high number of our, it's a very small group, so there's a large confidence interval, but we see that our Tongan students tend to be more disproportionately minoritized in terms of class. We see some, even though our larger numbers of our SWANA students compared to our white students are more likely to be first gen or low income than the white students, although less so than other groups. So there's a lot here. Sorry, I'm rushing through that. In terms of some outcomes, I want to look at some basic needs. So there's been previous talks on this. So this is, again, from survey data from the undergraduate experience survey. This is combining 6 questions to form a measure of food insecurity. And we see that 43% of our undergraduates in 2018 were food insecure. That's higher rates for transfer students, much higher rates for our URM students, higher for first gen, higher for our Pell recipients. It's not that surprising given that the intersections we've seen, but that's a very large number of our students who are food insecure. And this is after a few years of having a food pantry and other efforts. We're still trying to expand those out, but there's a lot more work to do. And looking at homelessness, this is just a binary question, are you homeless or not? A better question would be asking specific conditions like, have you been living in your car? Have you had a place to stay? Things like that. But students who explicitly say, yes, I've been homeless, 4% of students, highest is for our African-American students at 11%. It's also higher for transfer students at 8%. So a not insignificant number of our students have been homeless in the past year.
And Andrew, we probably know that that's underreported, not just because of cars, but also that students, when they're couch surfing,
Exactly.
when they're sharing, they don't report themselves.
Exactly. So this is heavily underreported. We know that also from other surveys. When we look at UC OP did a larger survey of basic needs, and they asked much better questions around this. And you see a higher rate, almost double that rate, or around double that rate of homelessness overall for the campus, around in that sort of 5 to 10% range. So yeah, there's a lot of underreporting around this issue. Looking at campus climate, just a quick overview, there's a question that says, students of my affinity group are respected on this campus, and it says, of my gender, of my race, ethnicity, of my sexual orientation. I'm showing a few things. One on gender, relatively similar. It's not shown here, but when you look at transgender, gender nonconforming folks, they have much lower respect rates on this particular question. When we look at race ethnicity, we see that our white and Asian students have much higher things of respect, whereas African Americans are under 50%. So under 50% of our African American students are respected for their race ethnicity. And you'll see that most of that is in that light blue bar, which is the lowest level of just sort of tenuous some would agree. We see also big differences around Pell in terms of their income.
So question,
Yeah.
do we disaggregate this information by faculty, staff, and peer student? Or is this just in general?
This is overall, although the next question will get a little bit into a very highly correlated thing, which is looking at, in the past academic year, I've heard, in this case, students express negative views about gender, race, ethnicity, whatever the relevant dimension is. It's highest for students. Students are hearing from other students. There's another question about instructors, another question about staff. it's much lower. The highest is for students, and that's congruent with the 2013 climate survey, which found that peer-to-peer was the highest levels of exclusionary behaviors. So that's one thing. In classrooms, like what's happening, the 2013 survey found that for students, a large percentage of it was happening in classrooms. So it's peer-to-peer in classrooms. What is the role of an instructor in managing that space and setting a tone, intervening where appropriate to stop it? We see that for relatively even rates for men and women. We see much higher for our URM students, particularly for African American and our Native students, at over 40%, hearing other students saying negative things about race, ethnicity. And we see higher for Pell recipients than non-Pell around income and class.
Do we disaggregate that information by colleges and
It can be. I don't have that. I don't know those off the top of my head, but we absolutely can disaggregate by college, by department. That's all very possible. And there will be some similar things every department will get a report for the My Experience survey that will be local to that unit. So there will be information on that will be coming out. One thing that's also relevant is study group exclusion. We find that 16% of students reported being excluded from study groups, with higher rates among transfer students, among URM students, first-gen students, Pell, low SES students. So what does that mean in terms of how do you just let people choose their own study groups, or do you say, do you assign study groups? Because if you just let them, there's probably going to be some dynamics happening that leave some students out disproportionately. And around sexual violence and sexual harassment, this is from the My Voice survey from last year. We see that this is looking at harassment, stalking, relationship violence, and sexual assault. Basically the groups that we've been talking about before, all through here, women, transgender non-binary folks, LGBTQ+, URM students all experience these, tend to be at higher rates. And so just thinking about that in terms of classroom dynamics. Also, I'm going to guess that most people in this room are responsible employees, which means that if someone discloses something to you, you are obligated to report that, and thinking about what's happening in terms of the dynamics. What are you doing in terms of knowing students have resources, and what are the confidential resources like Path to Care, where they can receive confidential services. Just thinking about what does that mean. And of course, when we look at intersections of these demographics, we see higher rates at the intersection. So if you are a woman who is LGBTQ+, you have higher rates of experiencing relationship violence, sexual assault. Similarly for LGBTQ+, who are also URM, all of these, unsurprisingly, compound in terms of the experiences of these. So I want to leave some room for questions and discussion. So I just want to wrap things up by saying, I hope you've seen that there are lots of different dimensions of diversity, many of which I haven't even gotten to. But so the notion of a typical Berkeley student is kind of nonsensical. But even as diverse as Berkeley students are, we are less diverse in California, we're less diverse than UCLA, and certainly less diverse than any of our other peer UCs. And there's lots of challenges facing our students on campus in terms of basic needs, food and housing, facing various forms of hostility, primarily from their peers, but also harassment and other issues. And then we're seeing that minoritized and marginalized communities are facing these at much higher rates than their majoritized counterparts. So I now want to open things up to questions and let you have your discussion. So I apologize for running a little late, but questions or thoughts, please again feel free to reach out to me for anything about this or other things. And thank you for letting me take some of your time.
Can we make the slides available to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, so Are there specific questions for Andrew?
Yes.
Hi, Andrew. Are you familiar with, from within your office, how this is shared with the department or colleges on campus? And since we're here thinking about classrooms, I guess I'm asking from the perspective of helping have this be prioritized in the mission of those departments, in the classroom specifically, but also in the labs and research spaces, and et cetera.
In terms of how it's disseminated, so.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, the campus climate survey, there are results for every department that are shared. So those happened in 2013 with that survey. It's going to be happening again this fall with the My Experience survey. Every unit will get results specific to their unit. How that's disseminated beyond that, I'm not sure.
Sure.
There's on the OPA website is quick facts, and so all of this stuff is really right there on the OPA website. So I grab it and use it all for the 375 class. I don't know if other people are doing that as well.
Yeah, but I think there's definitely a gap between what's available and how many people know it's there and how they're using it. And so I'm very open to how to get this out there more, because I always want people to use it. One thing that does happen, my colleague Malcolm, who's here, we're both part of the academic program review, and some things related to this do make it into program review for departments. We work together to try to get some of the demographic information. I work with my colleague who's not here, Amy Scharf, on getting some of those experience and climate survey results as part of that. It's every 8 to 10 years, so, but it's every department, but it's in that gap that there leaves a lot of people who may not know this information is there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Sort of.
I'll just throw out that just as I was listening to you, what I made a note of was that I need to educate myself more about how a Hispanic serving institution is defined, and I'm interested whether that definition can be applied to other groups. Like, could we be an African American serving institution? I mean, we obviously have failed to be, but is there a way to use that as a metaphor to think about improvements that we could make?
Well, even the question of like, if that's the label for the campus, what does that mean at every level?
Right.
Well, and also what is the rubric or the context in which we derive that? So not only recruitment strategies, but it's a federal status, and federal dollars can't support undocumented students. So it sounds, there's a picture that's very complicated inside that.
Yeah, so, and I mean, because just like a number, is not very meaningful, but it's like serving, being of service, there must be some measure of what that actually is. So are there ways that we could use that? I don't know. That's what
Victoria, what is the official definition of HSI?
25%.
25%.
Brett, did you have a burning question?
It's a burning comment.
Sure. Just
No, related to admissions and outreach and recruiting, I don't know if anybody went to the campus conversations session about a week and a half ago, and I think he goes by Femi, the new director or vice chancellor of admissions. He spoke about this so well, and their vision, I was really impressed by how they were going after some of these issues and what their plans were. So if you haven't seen that, it's on the homepage. It's useful.
Follow on your question and comment on this being designated as an HSI or African American Serving Institution. I think that the underlying thing to think about that is within our control as instructors is what does that actually mean,
yes.
right?
Yes,
To
that's what I was
support,
trying.
serve, and because if in the survey, Black students are saying that they are not feeling welcome, right? They're hearing it from other classmates, and there's something about how we are setting up our classrooms or supporting our students in their relationships with each other that's missing the mark, so that the students that we do have, it's not as high as UCLA, but that percentage is still not feeling welcome enough. So part of the draw is that, well, is this a place that I belong, right? And if some of our Black students are saying, well, no, then that word spreads to other Black students that don't come to Berkeley.
And it's not just an apocalyptic vision, right?
Right.
There are
What are those things?
But also we have this space on campus called the Fannie Lou Hamer Center that is wanting to be in conversation with faculty about this is where the students are gathering and reporting their experiences, and this is what we want to see show up in the classrooms. So it's like, how do we deliberately and intentionally make those connections between classroom space and gathering spaces on campus to alter and try to correct and get inside that campus climate?
What are we doing? What do you want to do in terms of strategy?
What do we want to do?
Yeah.
Do you want to have a moment at your tables to really, I think, like chew for a while, and then we'll come back together and return for 10 minutes? Yeah.
Okay.
And literally chew is food.
Yes, from in the classroom.
So we want to respect everyone's time and end on time, and I know Victoria's trying to rush off, so we would love to hear a little bit from you guys about what you're talking about, what's on mind. But before we do that, Jules, I'm going to ask you to just come up quickly and talk. And if other people have things they want to share about efforts that are happening in their departments or in their divisions to address some of these climate and learning issues, that would be great.
Yeah. I'm just speaking off the cuff here. Andrew Eppig actually was exceptional at providing us with some background data to complement a survey that we provided to students in an introductory biology course that serves 1 in 5 Berkeley students. So it has some representation within it, and we had a high survey response. And I think the biggest takeaways were that students who performed less well in the course are those who are underrepresented or marginalized in some capacity, whether they're URMs, first generation students. We have a higher percentage of female students in the course, yet the female students did less well than male students in the course. We also looked into sense of belonging among the students, and that also was lower across the board in all of those categories. And so that's concerning within science, where we're trying to close any leaky pipelines. And lastly, one other summarizing point was that we categorized health and wellness. We asked the students to categorize their own stress, health, et cetera, throughout the course of the semester, and that also was highly correlated with their performance. And that was something that we wanted to share across the campus specifically so that we can think about often a student may not be performing well in your course after the first midterm or something, and perhaps you already have an intervention in place. You go and talk to that student about their academic capabilities or struggles, but it's not often that we go and talk to them about outside of academic struggles, and perhaps we're not, and very likely we're not all qualified for that, but it's good to keep in mind that there are resources on campus that when you ask that question, you can then direct the students there, and just to be keeping that in mind just as much as their academic stresses, I guess. So those were like 3 summarizing things. Did you have anything else that jumped out at you, Jean, that you want to make sure that I?
No, just the fact that this effort is happening within
Sure.
the course, and to actually, you see a problem and you're trying to gather data to kind of start addressing it, and now you're trying to kind of socialize those results, and there may be efforts that are bubbling up in other parts of campus that, we could try to connect.
Which I really appreciate. Yeah, I think that's our big thing right now is we have these data and we're identifying what are the action items that we can do with it within our course, and creating a more inclusive and equitable community within our class is the priority. But again, like, what are those things that we can actually do to get there?
So one of the hopes of the workshop next week on trauma-informed pedagogy is how do we, as faculty or people leading classrooms, release some of our own fear of having those connections made of outside academic lives and inside academic environments, and how do we read anxiety, stress, trauma? What does that look like? And to be open to teaching ourselves about how we may move through some of those questions for ourselves. So hopefully you can come next week.
Yeah. Thanks.
Sarita.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a quick question for
Oh,
you.
sure.
I was wondering if you all looked at the demographics of the GSIs, of the faculty, and any kind of disconnect between that. I was an undergraduate here. I was also a graduate student here, and I was a GSI in psychology, and I had psychology undergrads tell me you were the first African American GSI I've ever had here. And so I'm just wondering about how that may impact, and how women, having a woman GSI or woman faculty, I don't know what the demographics look like in biology as far as men and underrepresented minorities and women. And
I don't have those data. I can tell you off the cuff, and Tammy, feel free to among the faculty, there's little to no representation. There are some female faculty members, and that's it. There are no minority faculty members who've taught the course, and we rotate among faculty who teach the course. So in those 4 semesters, there were 10 different faculty who taught the course, and that's still true. And then among graduate students, I would also say that it's pretty low in terms of minorities, but there are some minority graduate students, but I would guess maybe 15% or so. And then what we try to do for our best attempt for representation is we have UGSIs throughout the course, and so they work as peer mentors, and they tend to be well represented among the peer population because they're their peers. But among the graduate students and the faculty, that is something that our department needs to focus on.
Yeah. Tyrone Hayes would say, he said last year, that he was the only black faculty in the biosciences 30 years ago, and he can say it's true today.
It's still true.
Yeah. It's really sad. I'm still the only African American sometimes in a room. I don't know if that's the case here, but when I'm in meetings with leadership, when I'm as a student here, I've been here for 18 years, I am still the only one. As a psychology student, I was one of like 5 in a room of hundreds of undergrads. And so it's pretty sad that we're not changing. And I appreciate what Michelle mentioned earlier about like African American serving institution. When are we going to talk about that and what that looks like? And even though there are no federal dollars tied to that, but can we still make a commitment even if there's no money in it for the campus? So.
Yeah. That's why I'm concerned about our sense of belonging reported out specifically, because it'll apply to a lot of minority groups.
Yeah.
We can't do much about our or at least I can't in this moment.
Yeah.
Trying to prove that.
Any other thoughts that anyone wants to share in the last few minutes?
I wanted to say, and I wrote it down for you, that I think this is what Andrew presented is really useful, but I think it's also important that we also keep in mind the distribution of experiences, because it's certainly feasible to imagine someone saying, oh, I have black students in my class this semester, I've got to make sure I talk about poverty. Yeah. As if all black students have the experience of poverty. And so I think that when we see these kind of data and the emphasis you have on how many people hit the 3 categories, I think it invites too much of a thinking about the mean and not about the distribution. So I think we need to be cautious.
Yeah. And I will say, like, I didn't mention it, but I think it's really important, that it's, even if you have many groups that are disproportionately in these groups, very few of them are majority.
That's right.
In that. We only have a couple of groups that are majority all through. Most of our students aren't. And I think you're right. Like, let's not dichotomize and compress the experiences into. Yeah.
Right, but how do we distinguish between identification, self-perception, and treatment? Is that even if those connections are made by us, the student-to-student experience can actually be very different, even if you're not a